Hello and welcome to Economic Forum, where we discuss various issues affecting our economy. They may be matters to do with religion, culture, industry, commerce, accountancy, and many topics. All of them we discuss here with regards to how they affect economic development. My name is John Masugu. The coming of the internet has given rise to many communication platforms whereby, over and above the media that we've known over the years, different individuals or groups are now communicating messages over these platforms. And most of these messages are not verified. And resultantly, they bring about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, fake news, and other terms that are now coming up. So in order to discuss some of those issues and how they affect economies of different countries, Zimbabwe in particular, we've invited an information and communication expert who is a media expert and trainer as well. All those things come in, and that is Chris Chinaka. Chris, welcome to Economic Forum.
Thank you, John, and thank you for the invitation.
With the advent of all these things that I've mentioned, you obviously have faced the challenges because you are now competing with an individual at their own place at home and so forth, who is publishing like you, journalists and so forth. Give us the state of affairs at the moment with regards to the rise of misinformation, disinformation and so forth in that regard.
I think the first is to paint where misinformation, disinformation and malinformation stands in terms of world problems at the moment. Alongside the COVID pandemic and climate change, fake news, misinformation and disinformation is regarded as the third most prevalent problem that is affecting the entire world at the same time, and there's such serious implications for everyone.
At times people find it difficult to differentiate those terms. Maybe very briefly, Chris, to many people they actually sound the same. What is misinformation, disinformation and malinformation?
Let's start with disinformation. Disinformation, as it says, is literally it's described as organized, a way in which information is being purposely packaged to misinform, right? And that takes us, so disinformation is when people go out of their way to actually identify, they know that they are packaging this information to misinform people.
For example, if I say Chris at his shop is selling burgers that are out of donkey meat,
that is disinformation. That is disinformation because you know it's not true, but you have packaged it in a manner in which we have to fight with the rest of the public who have seen that message. The second part is misinformation. Misinformation happens to almost all of us. The assumption is that you mean well, but you have not verified whether that information is true. And therefore, the story that you suggested earlier, that I'm selling stale food, I'm doing all sorts of shenanigans around my business. Although you have not verified, you think the world or your friends and family and everyone in your community should get to know this. And you're doing so from, you mean well, but it does not always end well. So you're sending out that information.
So from misinformation, where do we go to?
We go to malinformation. And mal is, as the word says, mal, it's malicious. It's that information may be true, but you are going out of your way basically to suggest Chris is a philanderer, is a fraudster. You know that has happened in my life, right? We're using this as an example. That hasn't happened actually. But you know that is what has happened to John. And you go out to maliciously spread that information. That is where malinformation comes from.
And it affects John or Chris's business, isn't it?
Very much so.
Or even a country, you say something about a country and people or other countries fail to trade with it because of the information that is coming out of it or about it.
Yes, and you could use Zimbabwe as an example, for example. We've had debates around the level of inflation, for example. Right? We know we've suffered hyperinflation at different stages of our economic life or as a country. But you have people who are using the basis of the old history, sometimes even to put figures that may not be true, or that are not true on the market. And because you have put it, once you have put it out on the market has no inclination or sometimes capacity to fact check that, and that goes almost as factual. And that affects the way people would relate to Zimbabwe at that particular time. May have been true at one point, but may not be true at that particular point. And that is where malinformation and disinformation meets to have a serious impact on the business environment and the image of a country or an organization or a person.
Do all those that you have defined constitute what we term fake news?
Fake news has come to be understood as a collective of all those malinformation, disinformation, and misinformation. So the shorthand for many people around the world is fake news. It wouldn't be news if it is fake, but that's how the world has come to regard the whole ecosystem of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation.
In the past, people relied on journalists like yourself for news, but also we've seen some publications falling prey to some of these. Very briefly, why is that happening when there is training that people like you and others are doing?
The first, I think, is a recognition that the media has grown so big and the quality control systems has fallen through the cracks with digitization, with technology, and all the rest, and competition to be first. So some of those things have fallen through. But the emergence of fake news has put pressure on the media to go back to the basics of fact checking, and there's a whole industry now growing globally around the industry of fact checking.
Chris Chinaka, who is our guest today, and today we are discussing issues to do with misinformation, malinformation, and other related terms, because they indeed affect business. So join us in the second segment, where we are going to be talking about how fact-checking has developed as a result. We are now in the second segment of Economic Forum, where today we are discussing misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, and other issues about untruths in the spreading of information. And we've invited Chris Chinaka, who is an information and communication expert, having come from journalism and media training. Chris, when we ended the last segment, you were talking about how all these are challenging journalism, where in the past people relied on the media, journalism, but now everyone, because they have a smartphone, are journalists. Now, how are you journalists being challenged, and what are you doing?
What is happening is, I think, as we're saying, the problem of fake news has now forced professional journalists to go back to the basics, which is that they got to distinguish themselves from ordinary media workers by ensuring that their work is the one that is factual, that is fact-checked, that is verifiable, and that they put in professional effort in that regard to ensure that the information that they eventually get out is as credible as possible. It's a very difficult task globally and in Zimbabwe as well. Why? Because of what you said first. Everyone who has a phone is potentially a publisher. So in that sense, where you have introduced the whole world into the media with no training, with no regard for the ethics, with no regard to the effect of their work or the impact of what they are disseminating, that is what has complicated journalism today.
One of the observations that have been made is that at times when you look at some of this information and it's spread by journalists themselves and you as media trainers and so forth, doesn't that become a drawback?
It's a serious drawback, and I also know that there are serious attempts to try highlight the responsibilities of journalists to the rest of the public, and to draw back and highlight to some of our colleagues who have fallen victim to spreading information without verifying it. That they have a responsibility to the profession, but they also have a greater responsibility to the public, because the public trusts them, thinking because they are trained media workers, therefore their information has been checked and verified, when we know it is not. Most of it will be sensational, most of it is opinionated, highly opinionated, and there's no basis in facts. That is what is complicating the information ecosystem.
In fact, Chris, that's a very important point in that when business, government, and other stakeholders don't release important information on time, then people start creating their own news. Talk about the importance of actually releasing information on time so that there's no speculation.
We must all recognize our responsibility to the information ecosystem, that we make a better contribution when we become sources of credible information. So corporates and businesses have a responsibility for timely, factual dissemination of information to try to cut down on speculation. That's the first responsibility. The second responsibility is also the responsibility to jump in when there's been misinformation and disinformation, to flag it and say this is not true in the following manner, and they do it.
Yes.
Thirdly, I think as businesses as well, they have a responsibility to educate the public, set aside funds for media literacy. Every organization now must be taking part in trying to clean up the polluted information environment.
Chris, from what you are saying, it brings us to ethics. Well, as journalism or journalists, they are ethics. But now that the whole world has become journalists, where do we draw the line? How do we bring the ethics to those who are publishing information when, in fact, they are not journalists?
I think the first line is to promote quality journalism, which is professional journalism, ensuring that the journalists have a responsibility for factual, fair, balanced presentation of issues. That's the first line.
Chris will continue with that. That's Chris Chinaka, who is our guest today. And today we are talking about misinformation, malinformation, and other issues to do with fake news, which are actually affecting business and economic development. So join us in the third and final segment of Economic Forum. We are now in the third and final segment of Economic Forum, where today we are talking about misinformation, disinformation, fake news, and other issues which Chris Chinaka, our guest here, has defined and also given examples and how they affect our economy as well as our businesses because of the information that would have been untruthfully disseminated. And this information is coming through different platforms, Chris. And there has to be a way of actually checking the facts before they disseminate information. Let's talk about the processes.
So the process of fact-checking first must involve information that is of public interest, not interesting to the public. And there's a major difference there. What's of interest to the public is our welfare, collective welfare, is our community welfare, is our global welfare. And what may be interesting and gets a lot of airtime and a lot of mileage may be our private lives, those interesting, sensational stories. So the first thing that we need to do as a country, and as corporates actually, is that we commit ourselves to fact-checking. And fact-checking is who is the source of the information. So the first thing that you do in fact-checking is that you put down the source of information. And the primary source of information must be the person or corporates closest to that information. So they become our source of information. But in that way, the information that they put across must also be verifiable by, I should be able to follow it and say, company A or business A has said the following: we produced X amount in this period. We see whether that is realistic in our environment. After you have identified the primary source, is that you then say, where is the collaborative information? Where else supports the information that we know? Because we also know that people have a habit of challenging information that may put them in bad light when it may be truthful. So that the process of ensuring that it is in the public domain is part of fact-checking. The third element that you do in fact-checking is that you must make it public, so that people are able to challenge that information. So what it means in those three steps is that all of us who are working with information or in the information ecosystem, whether as companies or as corporates, must commit to ensuring that the public we put the information we put in the public domain is factual, that it is verifiable. Secondly, that we engage the people to be able to relate to that information.
While you are there, Chris, when we're talking about information, we're not only talking about written information, we're also talking about photos, that are published. Probably, it's a photo about empty shops published today when the shops are full of goods. Or information about your company maybe 10 years ago when it was not doing well and it's published today. I think you have to say something about information being over and above written information.
Yes, information is anything about you that's in the public domain, whether it's in photos or it's in word or written or oral, right? And the way most of the fake information actually globally is being spread through images. And we are trying to train both journalists and the public to be able to use very simple tools like reverse image processes in order to actually distinguish that this photo which is being spread today about shop A, which is empty, is from 2008. And a lot of that is happening around companies and images, which is why I was saying at the very start that any company, any business which does not invest in information verification and fact-checking in this world today stands a very big risk, at very big risk of endangering its own brand.
But we've said situations, Chris, where even journalists that you train and that you work with at times are not believed, and they're also part of what is called brown envelope journalism, so that at the end of the day, they're not writing the truth because they've been paid elsewhere to write slanderously about someone else.
Unfortunately, yes, there are cases, not just in Zimbabwe, but globally, about hired guns. I call them hired guns, who take on work on behalf of other people to slander, to smear, to damage, to destroy.
And also to write that company A or company B is doing well simply because they've been paid for that.
Yes, that's a part of the sunshine journalism which we must try tackle in the interest of the public, that the public eventually must trust that journalists are working professionally and are not being hired in their services to do simple public relations elements, that we distinguish between adverts and journalism. And we try to take away journalism from acting as hired guns to fight battles between competitors.
What has also happened in order to make sure that people receive correct information is what you are doing in journalism to train citizen journalists among the people so that the correct information actually disseminates from the communities. How far have you gone with that in terms of success?
It's an ongoing program, I think, in the sense that when you look demographically, we have a very young, sometimes energetic, enthusiastic fellows coming into the media thinking they can make a contribution. We recognize that energy, but we need to temper that energy with a bit of professionalism. It has to be ongoing work. It can never be complete. I think I would like to go back to the brown envelope journalism, that corporates and businesses as well must desist from corrupting the media. Because at the end of the day, a corrupt media does not save anyone. It may save you for the day, but creates a false impression about business, about it will catch up eventually with you.
That's Chris Chinaka, who is an information and communication expert coming from the area of media training, who has been talking to us about fact-checking and how that can improve in order for business not to be affected by lies, untruths, and other things that can damage individual business or even the image of the country. So, Chris, I would like to thank you very much for coming on to Economic Forum.
Thank you very much, and all the best with the work you're doing.
Yes. So if you would like to get in touch with us, you can do so on the numbers that are showing on your screen, as well as the media platforms that you can find us and engage with us about some of these issues that we talk about. And if you have missed some of the episodes of this program, you can actually watch them on our YouTube channel, which is Economic Forum Zimbabwe. So on behalf of Chris Chinaka and the production crew, this is John Masuku.